Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 25. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
I'm Michael Curtis. I'm a landscape and coastal archaeologist and also chair of Northamptonshire Archaeological Society. And my association with this fascinating object is because I lecture and talk a lot around the county about the Roman period.
You talk about an object, but we ought to make this very clear. It is an object formed from many objects.
In fact, it's not just many objects. We don't know how many objects, if we're being very practical about this, because they are fused together. And indeed, the original assessment came up with 1,900 possible coins in this hoard. That's based on the assumption that the weight equals the number of coins. So it could be more, it could be less.
And the hoard of coins has a name, I believe.
It is the Wootton Coin Hoard.
Where was it found, he said, asking what may be a very silly question.
The obvious answer to that would be in the ground, but it actually is from Wootton Fields. It's from an area that is not too far away from a known Roman villa, and it was found during redevelopment.
So we're talking about Roman coins, I take it?
We are talking about late Roman coins, not just Roman coins, but late Roman coins. And what's the significance? As the Roman period progressed, coinage itself went through a series of phases and a series of issues in terms of its distribution and indeed its circulation. And what's important about the late Roman period is that firstly we see that the circulation of small coinage becomes more prevalent, and also there are problems. The Roman Empire is under pressure. It needs money to actually pay the army, so it gets a bit stricter in terms of its collection procedures. And so this hoard is really significant in the sense it comes at a time when there is possible economic disruption and displacement.
In terms of coinage, you talk about these being Roman coins. Would the coins have had value outside of the Roman communities, the Roman army? In other words, were they commonly traded with people, frankly, who were indigenous to Northamptonshire?
They must have been commonly traded because certainly this villa site has produced quite a lot of coinage. We say late Roman, let's perhaps give some dates to this. We know that the coins were issued between a period 335 to 341 AD. Now that's when they're issued. So what we have to do is apply a factor to allow for their circulation. So if we add, say, 30 years on top of this, we are looking at a time when certainly there is a fair bit of economic disruption. Indeed, the excavation of the nearby Roman villa also reflected this, because there was a change in use at the Roman villa, and this may well reflect as we're now coming into the period and towards really the end and the breakdown of local Roman governance.
Do we know what the coins were made from? Coins on their face have a certain value, and when they are exchanged, they take their value and one person receives the value in return for trade. But sometimes the coins have an intrinsic value in their own right, sometimes not. What about this hoard?
The hoard actually is deposited at a time when gold and silver coins are rare, so that just leaves us with bronze coinage. And that's why there is the smaller denominations. What these coins probably represent, and we have to be frank and say there's an awful lot of these coins in this particular Roman villa environment. It's probably a period when there's been a lot of trading, so they've sold a lot of something. Now that could have been crops. It could well be other things like metalwork, craft tools, anything like this. But the pot itself is quite interesting. When it was found, the pot was on its side, and that's more likely a result of ploughing in the area after the Roman period. The plough has clipped the top of the pot and it's tipped it and dragged it a bit in the soil. That's also contributed to the pot breaking up. So when found, the pot is on its side, but when deposited, the pot was upright. It was obviously accessible, which is another interesting factor, because it was sealed by another small bowl that was used as a lid. The pottery in itself perhaps gives us a clue as to what was going on with this particular hoard, because the pottery itself was made of a type of ware that was produced in Bedfordshire. So it's not unusual for Northampton, where there is a very strong Roman pottery industry.
Mike, you're painting a picture, and let me just take you back for a second. You've talked about a lot of coins found fused together inside what was a sealed pottery pot. Who would have had that kind of concentration of money? Are we talking about a trader? Are we talking about somebody from the armed forces, as you mentioned? Or could we be talking about governance instead, and government by the Romans?
This hoard is a pretty tight collection in terms of dates, and its deposition away from the villa is quite interesting. Several factors at play here. The first is, unlike today, there were no banks. This is probably a period in time when it would have been very unwise to have left your collection of cash out in the open where someone could get to it. So burying and storing in the ground is probably quite sensible in that context. And what this hoard may well represent is that certainly in Northamptonshire we have little visibility of what I call the invisible army. The invisible army was the people of Northamptonshire, the native people who made it all happen for the Romans. These were the people who tilled the fields. They did all the work for the villa owner. And what we may have here, because of this distance away from the villa, is not the villa owner's hoard and the profit from his trading, but in fact income collected by a member of that, or a family of that invisible army.
So this would be somebody receiving Roman coinage.
This could be wages.
Right. Do we know that the hoard, as it is described, was deliberately buried? Or was it something that perhaps time has covered with soil, time has covered, rather than it being buried as a deliberate act?
It has been certainly hidden. To me, this seems a practical deposition. Someone's been paid some money, whether it's been paid for their services, been paid for transactions. They've been paid and they have put this essentially in their cash box. And their cash box is this pottery vessel.
Right, so we're talking about the receipt of money for trade. We're not necessarily talking about somebody's life savings. We're not necessarily talking about life savings. You've already said that there are a great number of coins. People can come and see them for themselves. Not necessarily large denominations, but a large number. They're also fused together. Does the archaeologist in you scream to separate them out, to actually work out what we've got here? Or are you happier to leave them as a hoard? What is your reaction to the hoard as it now exists?
You ask a very difficult question, because my gut instinct is to say, let's separate them and see how many there are, see where they have been minted, and see what reigns they cover in case we've got the dating wrong from what we are seeing. But on the other hand, there is a moral responsibility to keep the hoard as it has been found. That is history in the making. And if you were to tell me what choice would you make, or ask me what choice you would make, I would turn to you and say, it's got to stay as it is, however tempting it is to get a bit closer into that hoard.
Your face is telling me, Mike, that you are tempted nevertheless, but good man for telling the story as it is. This is very much of Northamptonshire. This is the exhibition telling the stories, the histories of Northamptonshire. Given that the Romans were an occupying force, an invading force, this is an indication of trade going on between the indigenous community and the Romans. Do we have any understanding, therefore, of what the relationship between the Romans and the local population was? Clearly, barriers have been broken to do trade in the first place.
It was, I think, a process of assimilation. We have no evidence of hostility in this area. If we look at Roman Northamptonshire, there are times when we seem to have economic turbulence. There are times when, for instance, there seems to be a necessity to enclose some of the important trading centres. So towns like Towcester, indeed the walled settlement at Chester House, all happens around 170 to 175 AD. This is a period in time, if we look deeper into the archaeology, when we find that we have a pathway of buildings being burnt. We have Roman villas. Indeed, nearby, we have the Piddington Roman villa, which also has a fire about this time. And this all suggests that perhaps there is a little disturbance, a little upsetting amongst the communities. But the Roman authors, in all their few narratives about Roman Britain, don't pick this up. So it's obviously nothing like the Boudiccan revolt.
Mike, they are fascinating images that you have just painted. They are also fascinating questions which perhaps it's best that we leave unanswered and let people come and see for themselves. Thanks ever so much for telling me about the hoard today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.